Good afternoon. Welcome back. It is Saturday, June 24th, 2023, as we continue in our final week of June here with a few events, a few birthdays. So let's get rolling on those. There was not very much that happened on this date, especially in the NASCAR world. I use Racing Reference. I scroll from the first event to the last event, and the two events that stood out the most to me is on this date, 2006. In Milwaukee, in the Busch Series race, Paul Menard won his first ever race in that series. And then on this date in 2007 at Sonoma, Juan Pablo Montoya won his first of two Cup Series races. So those were really the highlights of events that happened on this day. So let's go ahead and go to the birthdays. Got a really big one to start off with. Born on this date in 1911, passed away in 1995, former Formula One World Driving Champion Juan Manuel Fangio. Of course, he's an Argentinian driver. I believe he won 5 Formula One titles. Just had an outstanding racing resume, and so just a very, very big legend. Speaking of legends, this is a legend in the NASCAR world and in the legendary voice and sound on the Motor Racing Network. Born on this day in 1932, passed away sadly in 2016. Mr. Barney Hall. Of course, he has a namesake award, the Hall Squire Award in the Hall of Fame. But most of his time spent in the MRN booth. And he does have a recorded opening for Dave Moody's Sirius XM Speedway show, where, he says, covering turn 3 or wherever from Barry, Vermont, Dave Moody. That voiceover is of the late, great Barney Hall. Of course, you always had Barney Hall and Eli Gold or Ned Jarrett or somebody paired up with Barney that worked really well. The MRN has a podcast where they show, or they have different races from their past. One of them was from the mid-'70s at Michigan, and Barney Hall was talking about flying into the track that weekend with David Pearson. Really, really good story. You need, if you can find it, listen to it, because Barney Hall is as good of a storyteller as you'll ever hear. Next on our list, born on this date in 1960, former Xfinity then Busch Series driver, Mr. Jim Bown. Jim is the younger brother of Chuck Bown, and Jim didn't have a successful career. He is a very serviceable driver, and I use that term a lot, and it doesn't mean they suck or they're a bad driver. It just means they got the best what they could out of their equipment without, overdriving it, tearing it up, and just being consistent. Jim had ran his own family team on the West Coast, had a couple top 10s in the Cup Series at Riverside way, way, way back in the early 80s. Moved to the Busch Series, had some good runs in his own car. 1994, he drove the 63 Hensley car, which he took over from his brother Chuck, who moved up to the Cup Series. But the results weren't there, so Jim kind of just bounced around a little bit. I'm not sure what Jimmy does now. But again, he was just a quiet driver. He didn't ruffle a lot of feathers, but he didn't get a lot of press either. So, either way, just he seemed like a likable driver. And I have got a TTM for him before, so those of you that do TTMs, Jim does sign through the mail. Our final birthday, driver born on this day in 1961. He's kind of married into the Alabama gang because he married the daughter of Donnie Allison. We're talking about Mr. Hut Stricklin. Of course, he is the cousin-in-law of the late Davey Allison. During this time, he was driving for Bobby Allison, so we got a few different incarnations of the Ray Bestis outfit that he had during his time there. In 93, he drove for Junior Johnson for 1 year. Then he hopped over to Travis Carter, kind of a stepchild team of Junior Johnson's, which that was just miserable for him there. Then he finished out the last 3 quarters of the year in 95 for Kenny Bernstein, got his first career pole in the fall race at Rockingham, where Ward Burton got his first career win. But of course, that team was shutting down at the end of the year, so he had to move over to the Circuit City car with the Stavolos, drove that for a few years, had a second place run in the Southern 500 in 96, but other than that, nothing to write home about. Then in the early 2000s, got a second chance, or another chance at Cup, driving for Bill Davis in the Hillis Brothers car. And again, that was kind of like the Travis Carter deal. It just didn't work out. So he did have a brief foray into the Busch Series with Mac Martin. Of course, this would be the team that Larry Pearson would take to a couple wins in 1995. There's a nice look at the Ray Bestis Brakes Buick. In 92, they switched to Chevrolets and later Fords. That was a really nice paint job. Always liked it. The blue, you can't see it here, but kind of in person, it's like a metal fleck. There is the Junior Johnson McDonald's Ford. The Smokin' Joe's Ford. I think it's funny you got two tobacco cards here, two tobacco cars back to back. You got the R.J. Morris, and then the U.S. Tobacco right back there. Of course, Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, not R.J. Morris, R.J. Reynolds and U.S. Tobacco. Of course, Philip Morris would be Marlboro and those brands. But then later in the year, they switched to this paint job, which is the one they would stick with when Spencer took over the car. There's a good look at the Quaker State car. Kenny Bernstein owned that one. Talked about the Stavola brothers. And then there's the Bill Davis Hills Brothers Dodge. So anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this Saturday. We will be back in the morning with a rip. Not sure what we're going to rip, but we will have something for you. So as always, thanks again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we will see you tomorrow.